The rage response. Sergeant Mara Cole had been floating in the dark for 6 hours, and she was starting to get bored. The liquid was warm, exactly skin temperature, which was the point. No thermal sensation, no light, no sound except the thud of her own heartbeat. Whoever built this tank knew what they were doing. Sensory deprivation. Strip the brain of input and let it eat itself. She'd read about it in survival school. The textbook said most people started hallucinating within 3 hours. Mara tapped her index finger against the wall of the tank. The sound came back to her a half-second later, deadened and hollow. She tapped again, harder, slightly different resonance. She moved her hand a meter to the left and tapped a third time. Composite material, roughly 4 centimeters thick. Chamber approximately 3 meters by 2 meters, based on the echo delay. She filed this information away and started counting seconds again. She'd been doing it since they threw her in. A running count that served as both clock and anchor. 14,209. 14,210. On the other side of the transparent barrier that Mara couldn't see, Technician Vore adjusted his monitoring array with 3 of his 8 limbs and used a 4th to flag an anomaly in the data stream. The human's cortisol levels were decreasing, not stabilizing, actively dropping. In 6 hours of total deprivation, her stress response was going in the wrong direction. He routed the flag to Warden Osek. Osek received the data packet in his central office, a curved room of polished obsidian that sat at the apex of the crucible, like a pupil in an eye. He spread the biometric readout across his primary display with a flick of 2 limbs and studied the graph. The line should have been climbing, a steady upward ramp toward panic as the brain, starved of input, began manufacturing its own horrors. Instead, it looked like the human was falling asleep. He opened the human's file. Homo sapiens. Newly contacted species, captured from a frontier patrol near the Keth boundary. Mammalian. Bilateral symmetry. Endurance-adapted pursuit predator from a Class 7 death world. Unremarkable physical statistics. Moderate intelligence. No psionic capability detected. Osek marked the file with a personal notation. Observe. They pulled her out on the 7th hour and gave her 30 minutes in a holding cell before Stage 2. The cell was carved from gray composite, no seams she could exploit, single overhead light strip, a bench that was part of the wall. Standard. Mara sat cross-legged on the bench, dried the residual tank fluid from her hair with her shirt, and cracked her knuckles one at a time. Left hand first, pinky to thumb, then the right. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who had taken her. The last clear memory was her squad's patrol vehicle getting hit by something that turned the engine block into a sculpture of fused metal. And then light, and then the tank. Her squad, Corporal Diaz, Private First Class Okonkwo, Private Chen, could be dead, or could be in tanks of their own. She didn't have enough information to assume either way, so she set the question aside and focused on what she could observe. The gravity was slightly lower than Earth standard. The air had a faint chemical taste, like ozone mixed with something floral. The light strip used a frequency that skewed slightly violet, which meant whoever built this place didn't see in quite the same spectrum she did. The bench was sized for something bigger than a human. She was still cataloging details when the wall shimmered and became transparent. On the other side, a corridor. 2 guards, not the same species as the technician she'd glimpsed through the tank wall. These were tall, armored in biological chitin the color of rust, with compound eyes that caught the light like cracked glass. They carried weapons that looked grown rather than manufactured. Stand, one said. The word came from a device on its thorax, not its mouth. Translation tech. Mara stood. They led her down a corridor that curved like the inside of a throat. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. Vrelki architecture, though Mara didn't know the word yet. Everything was organic-looking, as if the building had been grown rather than built. The air got warmer as they descended. The chamber they brought her to was circular and tall, easily 10 meters to the ceiling. The floor was a smooth, dark surface that reflected her boots. The walls were lined with apertures, hundreds of small openings arranged in spiraling patterns. Mara counted the ones she could see and stopped at 60. Each one could be a speaker, a projector, or a weapon. Probably all three. The guards left. The door sealed behind them, with a sound like cartilage popping. Mara stood in the center of the room and waited. The first projection hit her like a slap. The floor vanished, or seemed to, replaced by a yawning chasm that dropped into flickering darkness. Mara's stomach lurched, and her hands shot out for balance. Her heart rate spiked to 140 in 2 seconds. The biometric sensors in the walls drank the data. She looked down. Her boots were still on a solid surface. She could feel it. She stamped her right foot, and the impact traveled up through her knee. "Cute," she said. The chasm vanished. The walls rushed inward, the room shrinking from 10 meters across to 2 in a heartbeat, pressing in on all sides. Claustrophobic compression. Mara's breath shortened, and her pulse kicked up again. She closed her eyes, put her hand on the wall she knew was still at 10 meters, and found it there. The projection was visual only. The system cycled to its next weapon. The room went dark, total dark, darker than the tank. And then something moved in the blackness. Not a shape she could identify, just mass shifting closer. Her visual cortex filled in the gaps the way 100,000 years of savannah nights had taught it to. Big, fast teeth. The silhouette lunged, and her body threw itself sideways before her conscious mind could intervene. Pulse to 155, sweat on her palms. Her back hit the wall she knew was there, and she pressed against it, spine flat, hands splayed on the composite. Breathe. 4 counts in. Hold for 4. Out for 4. She found her heartbeat and wrote it down like a current. The predator shape dissolved. Another took its place, low-slung, wider, a body plan that screamed, "Ambush carnivore," to whatever part of her brain still remembered being prey on the grasslands. It rushed her from the left, and she flinched hard, her arms coming up in a guard, and felt her pulse kick again. 148. She pressed her feet into the floor. Solid, real, the texture of composite under her boot treads, and counted the points of contact. 2 feet, 2 palms on the wall behind her, the back of her head, 5 anchors. The predator wasn't real. The floor was real. She chose the floor. The shapes kept coming. A serpentine thing that coiled from the ceiling apertures, thick as her torso, that made her stomach flip with a revulsion older than language. Something with too many legs that skittered across the floor toward her feet, and she stamped on it before she could think, her boot hitting solid ground with a crack that grounded her again. Each projection was tailored to a different frequency of mammalian dread, the fast predator, the coiling constrictor, the skittering swarm. And each one found its mark. Her body responded every single time. She couldn't stop it. Evolution didn't take requests. But after each spike, she reset, feet on the ground, breath in 4-count cycles, proprioception, the position of her body in space, the weight of her own bones, the tension in her own muscles, real things, measurable things. She anchored to them the way she'd been trained, the way every survival school instructor had drilled into her. When the world lies to you, trust your body. Then the water came. The floor seemed to tilt, and black liquid rushed upward, cold, viscous, the temperature differential alone enough to make her gasp. It climbed past her ankles, her knees, her waist. The projection was visual, but something in the apertures was generating a pressure wave that mimicked the sensation of submersion against her legs. Her diaphragm locked. Drowning reflex. The most primal fear in the mammalian catalog. Water in the lungs, weight pulling you down, darkness below. Her heart rate hit 162, the highest yet, and her vision narrowed to a tunnel. She bit the inside of her cheek. Hard. The pain was a bright point of reality, copper taste, specific, locatable. She bit again. The water wasn't real. The blood in her mouth was. She breathed through her nose, forced her locked diaphragm to release, and counted down from 10. By 6, her heart rate was falling. Then the sound. No visual component this time, just a frequency that hit below the threshold of hearing. A subsonic pressure wave that vibrated in her ribcage and resonated in her skull. Every mammalian alarm system she possessed fired simultaneously. Her hindbrain screamed, "Run!" With a purity and urgency that made her legs twitch, her hands shook, her teeth ached from clenching. She dropped into a squat, made herself small, compact, and pressed her palms flat against the floor. The vibration was real. She could feel it in the composite. But the panic it produced was manufactured, a hack exploiting 65 million years of prey animal firmware. She acknowledged it the way she'd acknowledge a bad weather report. Noted, moving on. Her heart rate settled back to 94. Each projection hit. Each one triggered the full cascade. Pulse up, pupils dilated, muscles tensed, adrenaline dumping into her bloodstream. Mara's body did exactly what 100,000 years of evolution had taught it to do. But each spike came back down. Every time, the sawtooth pattern on the biometric display repeated with mechanical regularity. Spike, recovery, spike, recovery. Her body kept flinching. Her mind kept catching it. In the control room, Osek watched the sawtooth pattern on the biometric display and felt his thorax temperature drop, the Vrelki equivalent of unease. "Run the analysis again," he told Vor. "I've run it 4 times, Warden." "Then explain the reset." Vor pulled up the comparative database. 12,000 species had been processed through the Crucible stages. Every single one followed the same biometric arc in Stage 2. Initial fear spike, followed by escalating baseline as the brain failed to habituate, culminating in sustained panic that degraded cognitive function. The system worked because biological fear responses were universal. Every neural architecture that had evolved to detect threats had also evolved the cascading feedback loop that turned detection into paralysis. Every neural architecture except, apparently, this one. Her amygdala analog triggers normally, Vor said, highlighting the scan. The fear response initiates. But look, here. He magnified a structure in the human's brain scan. This region intercepts the cascade before it completes. It's not suppression. She's not calming herself. The fear signal is being rerouted. Rerouted where? Vor shifted the display. A different brain region, the prefrontal cortex, heavily networked with motor planning centers, was lighting up every time the fear spike peaked. The human's brain was taking the raw terror, stripping it for parts, and feeding the energy into her decision-making architecture. Her species evolved on a Class 7 death world, Vor said carefully. Everything on their planet is trying to kill them. If their fear response produced paralysis, they would have gone extinct. Osek stared at the scan. The fear wasn't breaking her. It was sharpening her. "Move her to Stage 3, he said. "Skip the recovery period." The guards brought Mara to a different holding area before Stage 3. This one was deeper in the Crucible, down a corridor that curved and descended. The cells here were arranged in facing pairs along a passage barely wide enough for 2 guards to walk abreast. Most of the cells were empty. Not clean empty, abandoned empty. The walls inside them were covered in scratches. Some were random, the frantic scraping of claws or fingers against composite. Others were deliberate. Tally marks, symbols in languages Mara couldn't read, crude drawings that might have been maps or might have been the scrawlings of something that had stopped being able to think in straight lines. One cell had a section of wall worn smooth where something had rubbed against it for a long time. Back and forth, until the composite had taken on a greasy sheen. The bench in that cell was cracked clean through. Mara catalogued all of it as she passed. Evidence, data. She was building a picture of this place, one detail at a time, and every detail confirmed the same conclusion. The Crucible wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to dismantle. The killing came after, once the dismantling was complete. Her cell was near the end of the corridor, separated from the cell opposite by a gap of about 3 meters. Force barriers instead of doors, shimmering faintly, like heat haze. The cell opposite hers was occupied. The creature was enormous, 3 meters tall even sitting down, covered in plates of dark chitin that overlapped like pangolin scales. 6 limbs, 4 heavy legs folded beneath it, 2 longer arms with articulated claws that could clearly tear hull plating. Compound eyes, each the size of Mara's fist, that refracted the light into fractured rainbows. It was trembling, not from cold, not from exertion. This 3-meter armored killing machine was shaking like a dog in a thunderstorm. its compound eyes unfocused and twitching, its claws rhythmically gripping and releasing the bench beneath it. When the guard's footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, it flinched so hard its chitin plates rattled. "Hey," Mara said. The compound eyes swiveled toward her. She saw her own face reflected dozens of times in their facets, stretched and distorted. "What are you?" it asked. The translation came from a collar around its neck, flat and affectless in a way that didn't match the shaking. "Human. Mara. You." "Thresh." A pause. "Kelvani. How long have you been in here, Thresh?" 19 cycles. The claws gripped the bench hard enough to gouge the composite. "They'll put you through stage 3 next. That's the one that—" He stopped. His mandibles worked silently. "The one that what?" "The one that shows you things you can't forget, things that haven't happened, but feel like they did." His voice through the translator was steady, but his body told a different story. 3 meters of natural weaponry, huddled on a bench, trying to make himself smaller. "I was a territorial guard before they took me. My brood thought I was unkillable. I thought so too. And now?" He turned one fractured eye directly toward her. "Now I know what my broodmates' death screams sound like, even though they're alive. I know it because the machine put it in my head, and knowing it isn't real doesn't make the sound stop." Mara was quiet for a moment. A guard passed the end of the corridor, the heavy, rhythmic footfalls of chitin-armored legs on composite flooring. The sound was distant, 20 meters at least, but Thresh's entire body locked. His claws drove into the bench material with a crack, and his compound eyes went wide and directionless, every facet reflecting a different angle of panic. His mandibles sealed tight against each other, and his breathing, a low, rasping bellows sound, stopped completely. He held that frozen posture until the footsteps faded, and then the air left him in a shuddering rush, and his body sagged. 3 meters of natural armor, claws that could score hull plating, and a single pair of boots walking past was enough to turn him into a statue. "How many stages did they put you through?" Mara asked. She kept her voice level, conversational, the same tone she used with spooked recruits. "All of them, 1 through 4. His claws released from the bench, leaving deep gouges. Stage 2 was the worst for my kind. The Kelvani fear silence. Our homeworld is never quiet. There are always broodmates nearby, always the hum of the colony. They gave me silence for days, then sounds that were almost right but wrong. Almost my broodmother's voice, but the harmonics shifted. Almost the colony hum, but with a frequency underneath that made my plates itch from the inside." He shuddered, and the sound of his chitin scraping was like gravel shifting. "By the end, I was hearing things they weren't projecting. My own brain started filling in the silence with worse. Stage 3. My brood, my territory, everything burning." He said it flat, the way you say something you've said too many times. "I watched my broodmother's shell crack open. I watched the nymphs scatter and get picked off one by one. I could smell the char. The machine made me smell it." Mara leaned forward against the force barrier. "What's in Stage 5? The ring. Combat. But no one reaches it with their mind intact. By Stage 4, you're not you anymore. You're just the animal underneath. Have you done Stage 5? Tomorrow?" His claws scraped the bench again. "They want me to fight. That's all I'm good for now. The thinking part is gone. They scraped it out and left the part that bites." Stage 3 was a room that looked like a medical bay. Clean white walls, a reclining chair in the center, with restraints that locked around Mara's wrists and ankles, a ring of projectors mounted in the ceiling, aimed at her head. She could smell antiseptic, or whatever the alien equivalent was. The chair was warm, the projectors activated, and she was somewhere else. Firebase Kessler. She recognized it immediately, the forward operating base where her squad had been stationed for the last 8 months. The prefab shelters, the comms array with its jury-rigged antenna, the mud that got into everything. She was standing in the central yard. It was raining. Corporal Diaz was kneeling in the mud. His hands were behind his head. An alien, Vrelki, she could see that now, stood behind him with something pressed to the base of his skull. "Sergeant Cole," a voice said. It came from everywhere. You were captured with intelligence regarding human colonial defenses. Provide the defensive codes for the Keth boundary installations. Each refusal will result in the execution of one member of your squad." Diaz looked up at her. Rain ran down his face. "Don't you dare, Sarge." The weapon fired. The sound was small and wet. Diaz's body folded forward into the mud, and the rain kept falling on him the same way it fell on everything else, and Mara's scream came from somewhere below her lungs. The yard reset. Diaz was kneeling again, alive, rain running down his face. The mud was clean. The blood was gone. But Mara's body still carried the spike, her pulse hammering, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair she could no longer feel, her eyes locked on his face. "Provide the codes, Sergeant Cole." Now Okonkwo was next to him. Okonkwo, who had a 3-year-old daughter named Adaiz, and a picture of her taped inside his helmet. He was looking at Mara with eyes that said, "I understand," and "Don't do it," at the same time. "Don't." Okonkwo started. The weapon fired twice. Okonkwo fell sideways, his hand reaching toward Diaz, and Diaz dropped straight down like someone had cut his strings. The rain filled the shapes they left in the mud. Mara tried to move. The restraints held. She threw her weight forward, trying to reach into the simulation, trying to... What? Catch them. Block the weapons. Her body didn't care about the impossibility. Her body saw her people dying, and her body wanted to stand between them and the thing that was killing them. Reset. Clean mud. No blood. Diaz, Okonkwo, Chen, all three, on their knees in a line, rain streaming down their faces. Chen was the youngest, 21, barely shaving, had lied about his swimming qualification to get assigned to the frontier because he thought it would be exciting. He was crying. The simulation had given him tears, and Mara hated it for that specific detail more than anything else. "Provide the codes. They're not real." Mara screamed at the ceiling, at the projectors, at whoever was operating this machine. "I know this isn't real. I know they're..." The weapon fired. Chen first. He made no sound. Then Okonkwo, who made a small one. Then Diaz, who looked at Mara the entire time and didn't flinch. And the last thing his face did, before the light went out of it, was nod at her, as if to say, "It's okay, Sarge. You did the right thing." And that was worse than the dying. That was the worst thing the machine had done to her yet. Reset. She tried to close her eyes. The projectors were designed for species with lidless eyes. The simulation bypassed the visual cortex directly, feeding straight into her neural pathways. Closing her eyes dimmed it, but didn't stop it. She could still see them, shapes in the rain, on their knees. "Provide the codes, Sergeant Cole." "I don't have the codes." Her voice was shredded. "I'm a patrol sergeant. I don't have access to... Please, I don't have them. I can't give you what I don't." The simulation didn't listen. It didn't negotiate. It didn't process her words as input. She could have recited poetry or screamed gibberish, and the outcome would have been the same. Diaz died. The rain came down. The mud was red, and then it was clean, and then it was red again. Okonkwo fell, reaching for something. Chen didn't cry this time. In this iteration, the simulation had given him a different face, a harder one, jaw set. And that was worse because it was new, because it meant the machine was adjusting, finding new ways to make the same deaths hurt differently. She tried to bargain. "Take me instead. Whatever you want, I'll use me. Put the weapon on me. Just stop." Reset. Diaz on his knees, rain on his face, the exact same droplet running down his exact same jaw. She'd memorized it by now. She knew the precise moment it would fall from his chin. The weapon fired, and the sound, that small, wet sound, she would hear it for the rest of her life. The sound, and the way a body stopped being a person and became a shape in the mud, and the rain not caring, and the mud not caring, and the machine cycling back to the beginning like none of it mattered, because to the machine, it didn't. She broke. The grief came like a wave of black water. Her body seized against the restraints, and she howled, not words, just sound, a raw animal noise that made the monitoring equipment spike across every axis. The biometric displays read, "Psychological fracture, confirmed." In the control room, Vore logged the timestamp. 19 minutes, faster than average for a new species, but within normal parameters. Osek nodded. The system worked. The human's resilience in Stage 2 had been interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. Stage 3 bypassed the rational brain entirely and struck at the social bonds that held the psyche together. No species survived it intact. He turned to review the next contestant's file. "Warden." Vor's voice was wrong. Osek turned back. On the display, the biometric readout had changed. The grief indicators, the hormonal cascade associated with loss and surrender, had peaked and were now dropping. Rapidly, but they weren't being replaced by the flat, dissociated state that normally followed a fracture. The numbness that made contestants compliant, controllable, ready for the ring. Something else was rising. Mara's chest heaved. The sobs were slowing. She could still see Diaz in the mud, still hear the sound, and something inside her. The part that loved her squad, the part that remembered teaching Chen to play poker and listening to Okonkwo talk about his daughter. That part was gutted, raw, bleeding. The simulation was still running. Diaz knelt in the rain again, mouth-forming words she'd memorized 5 cycles ago. The projectors didn't know she'd already broken. They kept going. The weapon fired, and the mud took another body, and the rain kept falling. But underneath the grief, in the deep architecture of her brain, where 100,000 years of Death World evolution had laid its foundations, something was shifting. Not quickly, not all at once. It started in her hands, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room, a heat that bloomed in her palms and spread up her forearms and settled behind her sternum like an ember finding oxygen. The sadness didn't go away. It condensed. It became heavy and hot and specific. The grief stopped being a wave and became a weight, and the weight was something she could hold instead of drown in. It moved from her chest into her hands, and Mara felt her fingers stop shaking. They started to close into fists. The process was not conscious. She didn't decide to stop crying. The tears dried because something in her nervous system, something old, something forged on savannas where grief that lasted too long got you eaten, had taken the raw material of her anguish and begun to refine it. Strip the helplessness, strip the despair, keep the heat, keep the energy, redirect. They did this to her people. Someone did this, not an earthquake, not a disease, not an impersonal catastrophe. A someone with intent who had built a machine to put the memory of her people's deaths inside her skull and watch her react. They put images in her head that she would carry forever. The fact that Diaz was probably alive somewhere, maybe, didn't matter. The machine had given her the memory of his death, and that memory was real now. It lived in her neurons, and someone had put it there on purpose. The someone had a location. The machine had components. The components were made of materials, and materials had breaking points. The grief became a structure. The despair found a shape, and the shape had edges. Mara opened her eyes. The simulation was still playing. Diaz, rain, weapon, mud, but she was no longer watching the content. Her vision had changed, not blurred, not narrowed, clarified. The tears had washed something away, and what was left saw differently. She looked at the projectors in the ceiling, and she saw the hardware. The mounting brackets, 4 per unit, Phillips head equivalent, slightly corroded, where condensation had settled. The power conduits running into the wall, flexible composite tubing, approximately 2 centimeters in diameter, entering the wall through sealed grommets. The seam where the ceiling panel met the projector housing. Structural weakness, 0.5 centimeter gap where the sealant had shrunk. She looked at the walls. The apertures from stage 2 were absent here. This room was built differently, smoother, but the door seam was visible, a hairline crack in the white composite, and beside it, a recessed panel that the guards had used to operate the restraints. 3 meters from the chair. Too far to reach, but not too far to reach if the chair weren't bolted down. The restraints on her wrists were magnetic. She couldn't break them, but she could feel the chair beneath her, and the chair was bolted to the floor with physical fasteners, and physical fasteners had tolerances. She'd been rocking against these restraints for 19 minutes of simulated executions. The bolts had been absorbing lateral stress that entire time. She started rocking the chair, micro-movements, left and right, testing the bolts, methodical, patient. The simulation played on. Diaz knelt, the rain fell, the weapon fired, and Mara worked, and the heat in her hands was steady, and her breathing was even, and she was not okay. She would never be okay about the sounds the machine had made her hear. But she was functional, and functional with a purpose, and the purpose had a direction, and the direction was toward the people who did this. In the control room, Vor's monitoring display showed a brain scan that he had never seen in 12 years of operating the Crucible. The human's amygdala, still firing, still screaming fear and grief and loss, was being systematically overridden by a cascade originating in the anterior cingulate cortex. The prefrontal cortex was lighting up like a reactor going critical. Motor planning, spatial reasoning, tactical assessment. The fear was still there, the grief was still there, but they had been subordinated to something else. "What is that?" Osek asked. His thorax temperature had dropped 3 degrees. Extreme alarm. "I don't know," Vor said. "Our taxonomy doesn't have a classification. The closest analog in other species is a terminal aggression state, a dying animal lashing out. But her cognition is increasing, not degrading. She's thinking more clearly than she was before the fracture." "That's not possible. Post-fracture cognition always. I know what it always does, Warden. Look at the scan." They moved her to stage 4 within the hour. No recovery period. The holding cell, the conversation with Thresh, the slow rebuild, all skipped. Osek wanted to see what happened when the system hit this human with its final psychological tool while she was still in whatever state this was. Stage 4 was a small room with a single chair and a holographic display. No restraints, no projectors, just information. The display activated and began presenting data, structural blueprints of the Crucible. Every corridor, every cell, every ventilation shaft, guard rotation schedules, weapon specifications, force barrier frequencies, the complete architectural layout of a facility designed to be inescapable, presented with mathematical precision. Then the historical data. 12,419 contestants had entered the Crucible over its operational lifetime. 0 had escaped, not one. Of those, 12,806 had attempted escape at various stages. Every attempt was catalogued, method, duration, point of failure, and outcome. The data was exhaustive. It was irrefutable. The message was clear. You cannot leave. This is not a challenge to be overcome. This is a mathematical certainty. Accept it. Mara sat in the chair and watched the data scroll past. The architectural blueprints, the guard rotations, the 12,419 prior subjects who had tried everything and failed everything. She absorbed all of it. The numbers were real. The blueprints were accurate. She could feel the truth of them in the way they matched the corridors she'd walked, the cells she'd sat in, the dimensions she'd mapped by tapping on tank walls. No one had escaped because the Crucible was, in fact, inescapable. The math was sound. Mara cracked her left pinky knuckle, then her ring finger. "I don't care," she said. The system waited. The display continued scrolling, adding emphasis, close-up documentation of specific escape attempts, the injuries sustained, the futility demonstrated in graphic detail. "I heard you," Mara said. "I understood the math. I believe the math. 0 out of 12,000. I get it." She cracked her middle finger. "But I'm going to try anyway, and if I fail, I'm going to try again. And if that fails, I'm going to keep trying until you run out of ways to stop me, or I run out of blood. And I want you to know." She looked directly at the sensor cluster she'd identified in the upper corner of the room. She knew Osek was watching. "That I'm going to do this not because I think I can win. I'm going to do it because fuck you." In the control room, Osek's translation system struggled with the last 2 words. The literal rendering was meaningless, a reproductive act directed at a non-present party. But the tone, the biometrics, the body language, the system's contextual analysis eventually settled on the closest Vrelki equivalent. "I reject the premise of your authority over me, and I will expend my existence to demonstrate that rejection." Osek had processed 12,000 contestants, predators who could crack hull plating, psychics who could rewrite neural pathways, hive minds that could coordinate escape attempts across dozens of bodies simultaneously. None of them had frightened him. Mara was returned to the holding cells. She didn't know why, whether they were regrouping, recalibrating, or just deciding what to do with a contestant who refused to follow the script. She didn't care about the reason. She cared about the fact that Thresh was still in the cell across from her. He looked worse. His chitin had lost its luster, gone from dark bronze to a dull gray. His compound eyes tracked her movement as the guards pushed her into the cell, and she saw recognition in the way his head tilted. "You're still here," he said, after stage 3. "I'm still here. How?" Mara sat on the bench and pressed her back against the wall. Her body hurt. The restraint chair had left bruises on her wrists, and the adrenaline that had been sustaining her was exacting its metabolic toll. She was hungry, dehydrated, and running on something deeper than energy. "When I was 22, she said, my unit got dropped on a moon called Hestia 4 for what was supposed to be a 3-day recon. Our extraction got shut down on day 1. No backup, no resupply. The locals were not friendly." Thresh's claws stopped their rhythmic gripping. He was listening. "We held a position in a river valley for 9 days. 9. No sleep rotation because we didn't have enough bodies. 3 of us on a perimeter designed for 12. We ate ration bars for the first 2 days, and then we ate whatever we could find that didn't actively try to eat us back. By day 5, I was hallucinating. By day 7, I'd forgotten my mother's name. Why are you telling me this? Because on day 9, when extraction finally came, I walked onto that shuttle under my own power. I couldn't remember my name, I couldn't feel my feet, and I was so dehydrated, my medic said my blood was technically a paste, but I walked." She leaned forward. "You're bigger than me, Thresh. You're stronger. Your species was built for combat in ways mine wasn't. But my species was built for this. For the part where everything's gone wrong, and the math says you're dead, and your body is failing, and there is no rational reason to keep going. That's our home territory. That's where we live." Thresh was very still. His compound eyes had focused. All the fractured facets aligned on her for the first time since she'd met him. "They're going to put us in the ring tomorrow," Mara said. "Stage 5, and they expect us to be animals because that's what their machine produces. Broken things that fight because fighting is all that's left." "That's what I am now," Thresh said. The translator rendered it flat, but his claws dug into the bench. "No, that's what they want you to be. There's a difference. Can you hear my voice right now? Yes. Do you understand my words? Yes. Then the thinking part isn't gone. It's just buried under everything they put on top of it. And I need you to find it, because I'm not going into that ring to be an animal, and I need someone at my back." The ring was the largest space in the crucible, a circular floor of packed sand, 50 meters in diameter, ringed by tiered walls that rose 30 meters to a ceiling studded with observation ports. Behind each port, a neural link connection allowed the quorum, the thousands of wealthy patrons who funded the crucible, to experience every moment through direct sensory feed. They felt what the contestants felt: fear, pain, rage, despair. That was the product. That was what they paid for. The sand was discolored in overlapping patterns, old stains that the cleaning systems couldn't fully remove. The lighting was harsh and white, flooding the floor without shadows, because the quorum wanted to see everything. Mara entered from the east gate. She blinked against the light and scanned the space the way she'd been trained. Perimeter first, then center, then up, 50 meters wide, walls too smooth and high to climb, observation ports too small to fit through, one gate on each cardinal direction, the gates sealed behind contestants. She heard hers lock with a pneumatic hiss. Thresh came through the north gate, standing at full height, 3 meters of Kelvani. Chitin plates locked in combat configuration, claws extended. His compound eyes swept the arena in fractured panorama. He looked like a war machine. Only Mara could see the fine tremor in his secondary limbs that betrayed what was underneath. She caught his eye and nodded. He moved toward her, not charging, not aggressive, just walking with deliberate purpose to stand at her left side. From the west and south gates, 3 more contestants entered. The first was a creature Mara had no reference for. low and wide, moving on a dozen stubby legs, its body covered in bony plates with a cluster of sensory tendrils where a head should be. It moved erratically, slamming into walls, changing direction without reason. Its tendrils whipped the air, broken. The lights were on, but the mind behind them had been stripped to reflex. The second was similar in affect, a bipedal reptilian form, heavily muscled, with a jaw that could clearly crush bone. It came through the gate, already snarling, its eyes glazed, saliva stringing from teeth that had been filed or broken on cell walls. Another animal, wearing the body of something that had once been a person. The third was different, small, barely a meter tall, covered in soft gray fur, with enormous dark eyes that took up half its face. A herbivore species, Mara could tell from the flat teeth visible behind its trembling lips and the way its entire body was built for running, not fighting. It stood just inside its gate and shook, and the sound it made was a high, thin keening that needed no translation. It was terrified, not broken, not like the other two, just small and soft, and dropped into a space designed for violence. The quorum's betting feeds updated. The odds on the herbivore were not measured in probability of winning, but in seconds of survival. The median bet was 11. Mara looked at Thresh. Thresh looked at Mara. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Mara moved first. She crossed the sand at a jog, not toward the snarling reptilian, not toward the erratic plated thing, but toward the herbivore. It saw her coming, and tried to bolt, but the gate behind it was sealed. It pressed itself against the wall, keening louder. "Hey," Mara said. She dropped to one knee 3 meters away, made herself small, kept her hands visible and open. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you." The dark eyes stared at her. The keening dropped half a register. "My name is Mara. I'm going to stand between you and everything in here, okay? You don't have to do anything. You just have to stay behind me." The herbivore's mouth worked. The translation collar on its neck, they all had them, produced a single word. "Why?" "Because that's what I do." She stood, turned her back to the herbivore, and faced the arena. Thresh was already moving. He'd positioned himself to her left, forming one side of a defensive arc around the small alien. His chitin plates were fully deployed, turning his body into a wall of dark armor. His claws flexed and locked. The plated creature on a dozen legs reached them first, charging in a blind zigzag. Thresh intercepted it, stepped into its path, and caught its forward momentum. With 2 arms braced low, his rear legs dug into the sand for purchase. The creature's bony plates scraped against his chitin with a shriek of organic material on organic material, and Thresh pushed it sideways. Not a throw, a redirect. Hard enough to send it tumbling, but controlled enough to avoid breaking anything. It righted itself, tendrils whipping, and charged again from a different angle. Thresh caught it again, adjusted his footing, shoved it past him. The third time it came back, slower, its trajectory wobbling. The reptilian came straight for the herbivore. It had locked on to the smallest target, the easiest kill, and it came in fast with its jaw leading, a line of saliva catching the floodlights. Mara stepped into its path. She was half its size. She had no weapons, no armor, no advantages, except that she'd spent the last 30 hours having her fear response systematically activated, catalyzed, and converted into something that the Vrelki emotional taxonomy didn't have a word for. The reptilian swung, a wide, looping haymaker driven by muscle memory and broken instinct. Mara ducked, felt the air displacement tug her hair as its arm passed over her head, and drove her fist into the spot where its jaw met its throat. Not a killing blow. She aimed to stun, targeting the junction where bone met soft tissue. The reptilian staggered back a step, more surprised than hurt. It blinked, refocused on her, swung again, wilder, this time with its other arm coming low. The low arm caught Mara in the ribs. She saw it too late, was already committed to her duck, and it connected with a flat, heavy impact that lifted her off her feet and dropped her sideways into the sand. Pain bloomed across her left side, bright and sharp, and she rolled on instinct, barely clearing the stamp that cratered the sand where her head had been. She came up, spitting grit. Her left side screamed, cracked rib, maybe 2. She ignored it. The reptilian was turning, tracking her, and she could see it winding up for another swing. She didn't give it time. She closed the distance at a sprint, got inside the arc of its arms where it couldn't get leverage, and hit it 3 times in rapid succession. Throat, the gap between 2 heavy jaw plates, and a spot behind where she guessed the ear would be. She was guessing about the anatomy, but the principle was universal. Hit soft things hard, and keep hitting until the target's motor planning fell apart. The reptilian's legs buckled. It went to one knee, then both, its jaw working open and shut. Not dead, not close to dead, but its motor coordination was scrambled, and its eyes had gone glassy. It wouldn't stay down long. Behind her, the plated creature had broken free of Thresh's latest redirect and was barreling toward the herbivore from the flank. Thresh was 2 steps behind it, reaching, but not fast enough. "Thresh, switch!" The word came out of her, the way it came out on the firing line, clipped, loud, absolute, not a request, not a suggestion, a command, carrying the full expectation that the person hearing it would respond, and respond now because someone's life depended on the next half-second. Thresh froze, just for an instant, the sound of a voice giving orders, not screaming, not pleading, not the broken animal noises that filled the crucible, but an actual tactical command delivered with authority. Hit something inside him that the crucible hadn't reached. The territorial guard, the squad leader, the part of him that had spent years responding to exactly that tone, that cadence, that unshakable assumption that he would do his job because his job needed doing. The thinking part, the part he told Mara, was gone. It wasn't gone. He pivoted. 3 meters of Kelvani in full combat configuration, spun with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that big, and put himself between the rising reptilian and the herbivore. His chitin plates locked into a shield wall, 4 arms spread wide. The reptilian staggered upright, saw the wall of dark armor in front of it, and hesitated. Mara took Thresh's place against the plated charger. It was faster than her, and outweighed her by a factor of 10. She couldn't stop it. She could redirect it. The first charge, she sidestepped left and shoved its rear quarter with both hands, sending it past her. The bony plates tore the skin off her right palm. She ignored it. The second charge came from the right, and she pivoted, slapped its flank, and felt her left shoulder wrench as it clipped her on the way past. Bad angle, mistimed by a quarter second. She tasted copper where she'd bitten through the inside of her cheek on impact. Third charge. She was ready this time, planted her feet, and redirected cleanly. The creature skidded past in a spray of sand. Her hands were both bleeding freely now, the skin shredded by bony ridges, and her left side pulsed with every breath where the reptilian's blow had cracked something. She didn't stop, couldn't afford to stop. The herbivore was behind her, pressed against the wall, making that thin keening sound, and that sound was the only thing keeping Mara's legs under her, because stopping meant it stopped too. The reptilian charged Thresh. 3 meters of Kelvani in combat configuration met it head-on, and the sound of chitin striking scale was like 2 boulders colliding. Thresh locked his claws around the reptilian's arms, not crushing, controlling, lifted, and set it down, gently. Well, gently for a Kelvani. The reptilian's legs buckled, and it lay still, chest heaving, the fight drained out of it by the simple reality that nothing it did could move the thing holding it. The plated creature charged twice more. Each time, Mara redirected. Each time, it came back slower, the zigzag pattern degrading, the urgency fading from its movements. On the third attempt, it stopped halfway. Its sensory tendrils waved in the air, reaching for a target, finding nothing. Because every target it had charged had moved every time, and the broken animal programming driving its legs couldn't adapt to a threat that wasn't where it was supposed to be. The tendrils drooped. It sat down on the sand, its dozen legs folding beneath it, and was still. The aggression was spent. Without a target that held still, the instinct had nothing to latch onto. The arena was quiet. The quorum's sensory feeds were still active, thousands of neural links carrying the data to paying customers across 3 sectors. But the feeds weren't transmitting what the customers had paid for. They'd paid for terror and violence and the visceral thrill of watching minds break under pressure. Instead, they were experiencing something that most of them had no framework for. The The human had protected the herbivore, not because it was strategically advantageous, not because of a pack bond or a hive directive or a territorial instinct. She'd done it because it was afraid, and she could help. The Kelvani, a broken, shattered thing that should have been nothing but claws and rage, had followed her voice back from whatever dark place the Crucible had put him, and he'd fought not to kill, but to protect. The Quorum's betting systems registered an unprecedented event. Total market collapse. Every bet had been structured around the assumption that Stage 5 produced killers. No one had wagered on a squad. In the control room, Osek stood before his displays and felt his thorax temperature cycle through extremes. Cold alarm, hot fascination, cold alarm again. He rewound the footage and watched it 3 times. The moment the human changed direction, away from the threats, toward the weakest contestant. The moment the Kelvani responded to her voice. The formation they'd assembled without discussion, without planning. From nothing but a human voice giving orders and a broken alien choosing to listen. He opened a new file. Priority classification. Direct to the Vrelki Military Council. Subject species, Homo sapiens. Recommendation, immediate reclassification from threat level 2, frontier nuisance, to threat level 8, existential. Rationale, human psychological architecture does not conform to standard models. The Crucible's 5-stage methodology, which has successfully processed 12,919 contestants from 847 species, fails to produce the expected psychological fracture state in human subjects. Specifically, Stage 1, sensory deprivation. Subject's stress response decreased during isolation. Hypothesis, humans use cognitive self-stimulation to maintain psychological stability in the absence of external input. Stage 2, fear conditioning. Subject's fear response resets after each trigger, rather than building cumulatively. The human neural architecture reroutes fear-generated neurochemicals into cognitive and motor planning systems. Fear makes them more operationally effective, not less. Stage 3, simulated loss. Subject experienced standard psychological fracture, but the fracture state converted within minutes to an unclassified response. The human emotional architecture processes grief into focused aggression. This is not a terminal rage state. Cognitive function increased post-conversion. Stage 4, hopelessness protocol. Subject acknowledged the mathematical impossibility of escape, believed the data, and elected to attempt escape anyway. The human cognitive architecture permits the simultaneous holding of contradictory positions, the knowledge that an action is futile, and the decision to perform it. Regardless, our taxonomy has no classification for this. Stage 5, combat. Subject declined to engage in expected survival-driven violence. Instead, she organized other broken contestants into a cooperative defensive unit, prioritizing the protection of the weakest over the elimination of threats. The Kelvani subject, previously assessed as fully fractured, responded to human vocal commands and resumed coordinated behavior. Assessment. Do not capture humans. Do not attempt to psychologically condition them. Do not put them in situations of escalating stress under the assumption that this will degrade their effectiveness. It will not. The human stress response is not a vulnerability. It is a weapon system. Every tool we use to break this human made her more dangerous. Respectfully, Warden Osek, Crucible Operations, Vrelki Interior Division. He filed the report and sat in the cold blue light of his control room for a long time. In the arena below, the lights were shifting. The harsh white floodlights dimmed by degrees as the arena's combat systems powered down, replaced by a warmer amber that turned the sand from sterile white to something almost golden. The observation ports in the upper walls went dark one by one, the neural link feeds disconnecting as the Quorum's paying customers dropped their connections. The show was over. It just hadn't been the show anyone expected. Mara Cole sat on the sand, with her back against Thresh's chitin plates, and took stock of what was left of her body. The inventory was not encouraging. 2 cracked ribs on the left side, based on the stabbing quality of the pain when she breathed. Both hands torn open, the skin of her palms shredded to raw tissue by bony plates. Her right shoulder wouldn't rotate past 90 degrees, something torn or deeply strained in the rotator cuff. A bruise on her right hip from hitting the sand that had already stiffened into a deep ache. Dehydration, Low blood sugar, 30-plus hours without sleep. The adrenaline that had kept her upright through 5 stages of psychological demolition was fading, and what it left behind was a bone-deep exhaustion that made her eyelids feel weighted. She could have closed her eyes. Her body wanted her to. Every system she had was signaling stop, rest, repair. She kept them open. The herbivore, Pell, had curled against her left side, its gray fur warm against her arm. It had stopped keening. At some point during the aftermath, as Mara had moved around the arena checking the unconscious contestants for injuries, Pell had followed her. Not closely. It kept a few meters back, those enormous dark eyes tracking her. But consistently, the way a child follows a parent through a strange place. When Mara finally sat down against Thresh, Pell had hesitated for almost a minute, and then crossed the remaining distance and pressed itself against her. "Mara," Pell said. The translation caller rendered it carefully, the 2 syllables placed with deliberate precision, as if the name were something fragile being handled for the first time. "Yeah, that is your designation. My name, yes." Pell's enormous eyes blinked slowly. "My people do not have warriors. We have no word for what you did. The closest concept in our language is—" The caller paused, processing. "The thing that stands between the weather and the harvest. A windbreak. Closer to, a choice to be where the damage falls, so it falls on you instead of on what matters." Pell's small body pressed tighter against Mara's arm. "We have a word for that, but we've never seen someone choose it for a stranger." The 3 other contestants were unconscious, or docile, arranged at the edges of the arena floor where they could breathe and recover without being stepped on. Mara had checked each of them for injuries that needed immediate attention. None were critical. The reptilian was breathing steadily, its glazed eyes half open, but no longer tracking. The plated creature hadn't moved from where it had sat down, its tendrils curled inward in what looked like sleep. The arena was quiet in a way it probably hadn't been in years. Not the silence of an empty space, but the silence of a space where violence had been expected and something else had shown up instead. Thresh was still. His trembling had stopped somewhere during the fight. She'd noticed it first when he'd responded to switch, and it hadn't come back. His compound eyes reflected the amber arena lights in steady, focused patterns. Not twitching, not scanning for threats, just watching, the way someone watches from a place they've decided is safe. Mara let her head rest back against his chitin. The plates were warm, Kelvani body heat radiating through the armor. She listened to his breathing, a low, resonant bellows sound that she could feel through her spine. Her own breathing matched it without her deciding to, and her pulse, which had been elevated for the better part of 2 days, began to slow. "Are you afraid?" Thresh asked. "Terrified," Mara said. He was quiet for a moment. "Why are you smiling?" Mara didn't answer. She cracked her pinky knuckle and watched the lights change color above them, and for the first time in 30 hours, she had no plan and no angle and no move to make. Just the warmth of alien bodies on either side of her, and the slow settling of sand in a place that had been built for breaking things, and had, against every expectation and every calculation and every odd in the house, built something else instead.